Everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Julie Petty. I work with Meat and Livestock Australia with the industry. We've got an exciting webinar lined up for you today, all around succession planning, some do's and don'ts that we've gleaned from people who've been through this process. And talk us through this sometimes quite challenging topic. We have an expert with us today, Mike Stevens from Meridian Agriculture, who's had a lot of expertise in this area and has been working on profiling some, I guess, don'ts, successful, non-successful stories from producers out there in the red meat industry. Before we get into all of that, I'll just quickly take you through a little bit of housekeeping for today's webinar. So for those, thank you very much to everyone who's already joined us. We've got about 45 online. If you're still in the process of joining or that you're going to be a bit late, it's all good. We will be recording this webinar and the webinar recording will be uploaded to the MLA website so people can access that later, and I'll make sure that that link is circulated to everyone after today's webinar. This is the webinar program today. Obviously, you need to connect and hook up to your WebEx system so that you can see today's slides. But in case you're not able to do that and you're not in front of your computer, you can also join us via audio only, and you can do that either via listening to the audio through your computer or on your telephone. So the O2 number is available on the screen at the moment, as well as in the reminder email that I sent around to all our registered attendees yesterday. So feel free to just pop that in if you're having any audio issues with linking up with your computer. Sometimes it's a bit easier to hear us when you hook up via the phone. All you need to do is just pop in the O2 number followed by the access code and attendee ID number. That'll be on the screen. I might just double check too that everyone can hear us. So what we'll be doing today, we will be recording the webinar, but we're also going to be taking questions from our audience members. To do that, there'll be a chat panel on your computer screen on the webinar program. It should be on the right-hand side. And you'll be able to pop your questions or comments into the chat function, just like sending a text message or an email. And you can send that either directly to me as the host or to both Mike and myself or to the entire audience. So what I might do, everyone, if you wanted to just pop in what we're doing at your place at the moment, the chat function, that'll just let me know, one, that I'm not here talking only to myself, which is always a terrifying prospect, and two, that you've found the chat function and you're working through that. So while everyone is just typing in what the weather's doing at their place, Mike, what we might do is start getting prepped for you to start today's presentation, if that's okay. So just give me 2 secs and I will double check and change you over to be the presenter if you're ready to rock and roll.
Rock and roll.
Excellent. We've got, I'm pleased to see we're not here talking only to ourselves, Mike. We've got lots of people coming through, and there's huge variety, of course, because we're in Australia, between something quite pleasant, warm and fine, through to hot as Hades and drizzling and miserable and cold. So, Australian weather. Thanks very much, everyone. So, Mike, I'm just making you the presenter, so you should see that come up on your screen at the moment, and I'll let you know when your slides come up for us to see, so you can kick off with your presentation. Okay, we can see your slides, so you're ready to rock and roll.
Very good. Thanks, Julie. And I'll just check that it will actually roll. Yes, it is. It'll roll through. So thanks, Julie, and thanks to everybody who's listening in. I'll assume that you can actually see the slides. Before I start on the presentation, I want to acknowledge MLA Donor Company and thank Julie. We did this case studies and we couldn't do them without the assistance of MLA, nor could we have done them without the assistance of the subject of case studies, all 16 of them who were very generous with the time and the information that they provided. So thanks to Julie, to MLA and to the participants, and also to my own team at Meridian Agriculture. So we didn't just start off and say, oh, we better do some case studies. With what seemed to be the three aims of family farming. Let me just say one more way of introduction. There's a number of sections in this presentation. We'll stop and allow people to ask questions. So get that opportunity as we go through. There is an assumption that there are three aims of family farming. To have funds for retirement, but you may not want to retire. Funds, though, means that you have choices. One is to hand on a viable farm to the child or children who want a farm. That's often one of the three aims. If they want a farm, and may mean that they've got to take on a considerable amount of debt. The aim is sufficient resources for the non-farming children to be happy with the result, both now and in the future. And often a good plan is one where nobody is overjoyed, but nobody is harbouring resentment. So we often look for a plan, what do people want and what will they wear. If we start to think about a happy family, economists get really worried, and so we describe that as satisfaction of interest. So what we're as being the three aims. Before we started the case studies, we had a number of informal discussions to the assumption that there were serious gaps in the knowledge, especially in relation to building the business in order to enable succession. We did a comprehensive literature review, and in parallel with the historical literature review, we reviewed texts which studied how farms grow. So we were trying to find out where are we now, and what do we know about this subject beyond agriculture. We now led us to, what snapshot of the state of Broadacre business in Australia, how big, and are likely to be viable, and is succession of a business really a reality? That was what we asked. Now, sent us to bears, and that slide might be a little bit hard to read, but I'm really quite surprised to find that in the total population of 2,130 broad farms, so when we talk about 130,000 farmers in Australia, forget about that. For purposes of sheep and livestock industries, we're leaving dairy out, we're talking about 52,130. We look at the gross farm income, that's the total income other than through farm employment or investment, of those 53,320 businesses, and cut them up, we can see that the vast majority of those businesses are very small. So the yellow line, the light yellow line, is written there, is marked there at decile 7. So 70% of 53,300 or 52,000 now, 130, sorry, broadacre farms in Australia, 70% of those have got a gross farm income of less than $500,000. You can back and say 48% have got a gross farm income of under $230,000. So we're talking about a lot of very small businesses, and with the size of those businesses, if people are realistic, it's unlikely that they're going to be able to achieve 3 funds, retirement, and family. So, without succession, and there's lots of talk about it, we need to understand that for a lot of people, it is just that, to be any holistic succession. So, Julie, at that point, I just put that question pause in. There may not be any, but if there's any clarification needed, particularly about those figures, quite happy to take that now.
Great, thanks very much, Mike. So, guys, just remember, if you've got any questions for Mike throughout the presentation, you can pop those into the chat function that we were using just before. And obviously, I guess it's can be a bit of a confronting topic. So I should say too that if we're going to talk through a bit more about some of the different methods people have been using in businesses that have helped them to successfully transition through this process too. So don't totally freak out at this point and leave us. Mike, at this point we haven't any through, so I might see if you manage to keep going, if that's okay. Oh, no, I've got one. Okay.
Yeah, one question there. G'day, Malcolm. That's all Broadacre Industries, so sheep, cattle, crop. So to underline that and to go back and look at the slide again, Broadacre Farms includes sheep, cattle, crop, everything except dairy cattle, cotton, rice is included in that Broadacre category. Particularly, and the question about cropping is quite pertinent in that if you've got income in there, sums are very small. So let's press on and say and get into again just before the case studies. We did a series of surveys. We surveyed professionals who advise farmers in a position to provide an opinion about matters relating to succession, and the second audience was farmers. So we did 2 lots of farmers, two lots of surveys, which we tested and modified and made sure that we got the glitches out of them before we put them out. Survey was asking advisors about the 3 aims. It was sent to 32 professionals, asked to send it on to other people. We ended up having respondents from 40 locations, which covered all states in all agricultural production zones and all Broadacre industries. And there were 47 respondents in the end. And between them, they answered on behalf of 6,476 farms, 12% of the Broadacre industry. And what the advisors said was the majority of people don't have a succession plan. Choose between a viable farm and a happy family. What do you think there is? Unfortunately, viable farm. They also told us that unless there are substantial gifts to the family, the goals can only be achieved by people in business who have end game in mind. Most businesses will not achieve the 3 aims. The assessment of the percentage of farms able to achieve the 3 aims was 45% think 20%, and we've got to look at what is the percentage of advisors and then their answer. 20% think between 20 and 40, and it's not clear for me. Percent think between 40 and 60, and 5% advisors think 60 to 80%. Now these are accountants, farm management consultants, rural financial counsellors, and bankers who are in a position to say 5% think that 80%. The bottom line of all of that is that in the very few farmers are able to achieve the three aims. And we ask the next question about sorry, let me go back. I might have confused you here. No, I confused myself. The second question was about whether they had a succession plan, and I put the wrong slide up there. So really, it's not responding to me now. It is from the advisor survey. Most businesses don't have an up-to-date plan. So the question was about whether it was going to be possible. The second lot is that the advice assessment was that most don't have a succession plan, and again the figures: 55, 20% of farmers, 10 think 20-40, 25 think 40 to 60, 5% think 60 to 80, 3% think above 80. So once again, the overwhelming information from the consultants and bankers, lawyers, rural financial counsellors is that most people do not have an up-to-date comprehensive succession plan. No questions?
So Rosie sent a question through, which is very pertinent actually, talking what's necessary to hand on a viable farm. Won't leave it to the child to build on what we have been able to hand on to them. So I guess it's a question around everyone defines success slightly differently. So I don't know if you wanted to sort of comment on that a bit more.
Yeah, look, I think, and we go to that further on, but let's answer it now. There is no rule that says that a farmer has to try and achieve the three aims. Some farmers will quite legitimately say, I'm going to farm this until I retire and sell it. It's my superannuation. Farmers will quite legitimately say, I'm going to hand the majority over of my assets over to one child. Some farmers will quite legitimately say, or farm families will quite legitimately say, what I want to do is try and achieve the three aims. And I'll go into a bit more detail later, Julie, but what's really unfortunate is that sometimes some farmers give the impression that they're trying to achieve the three aims, where in fact they sell it, or in fact they're going to give it to one child, or in fact they haven't made up their mind. And it's that mismatch of expectations which causes a lot of problems. There are just a couple of questions that I could with the percentage of the first 70%, that's 500 income, are viable standalone businesses. That is, they almost certainly have off-farm income. They wouldn't be able to survive without off-farm income. Separate that in our minds. So off-farm income is fine for as far as making a living is concerned, but if you've got one of those smaller businesses, it's limited the amount of investment in that business. Somebody taking it on, they need to understand that they will be dependent on off-farm income. And the next question there is, why do all advisors tell you to put more money into the farm when cash is what you do not have? Well, I know that all advisors would tell you that. If you don't have the cash to put it into the farm, if you've got to borrow it, you've got to make sure you can pay it back. What I would say is that in relation to the question, there are some farms where there's very high equity, so the capital's being a bit lazy. And we'll look later that farms that have been very successful have not maintained lazy capital. So So who asked that question, why do all advisors? If I haven't answered that well enough, shoot another one and I'll try and answer it a bit better. I can't see you. I've got great difficulty. We might.
Just got another question coming through. So,
yep.
In terms of that consultation you undertook with the advisors, was there much of a breakdown that you gathered in terms of what sort of organisations and structures did producers have who had succession plans? So is there a profile of people who are more likely to have those succession plans according to those advisors?
There is. But again, we need to jump forward a bit. There is a big, but I'll answer that now. I'll answer it now, and it'll come up again later. Very often people say it's too early to start a succession plan. My kids aren't old enough, or my kids don't know what they want to do, or I'm not sure enough about the future, so I'm not going to I'm not going to worry about a succession plan. The work we've done, that's fine, and in fact, some of the successful businesses have not developed a succession plan until their kids were in their 30s. But what they have done is to plan for succession. They've planned to have the choices. They've planned to have the investments. They've planned to have the business growing so that they had choices. So when it came to succession, they were in a position to do something about it. Does that
Thanks, Mike.
make sense? Okay. So survey will jump. So really what we were trying to find out is what factors have enabled family firms to continue in business for several generations, and what factors have prevented survival of farm businesses in the medium term. So we did 16, being approached 19 out of a short list of 30 case studies, and then what are the growth or otherwise of the businesses over time. In addition to that, we've got some mini studies on 100 businesses. What we were looking for when we selected the studies was to make sure that they all had something different to offer. And for people who might be interested in looking at them, we might have something which might somebody might read it and think, oh yes, that would apply to me. So up with these just very simple little line quotes. We're going to live like peasants. Describe one case study. We want as fair as possible. Described another. If the was even, the farm would be sold. So it might have happened there. It was a start, but with share farming, off-farm work and investments, if we hadn't had a succession plan, the farm would have been sold. On a larger outfit, the family told the directors, perform or sell. And that was our lapse. The farm had been halved and halved, and we could not allow it to be halved again. And then our fathers bought it and we had to pay it off. A really interesting study of a couple of brothers that just kept buying land, then died and left the next generation to pick up the debt. Dad and his brother always had the end game in mind, and that plan was what I was talking about before. They didn't know whether their kids were going to want to farm, so they built the farming operation and off investment so that when it came time for the kids to make a decision, they'd choose whether they wanted to farm, and having cousins all have to farm together. Study of a farm that stayed the same size, didn't grow over time. We were stewards. It wasn't ours to sell. Another, We want generation to be free to choose. And that's sort of the story. They kept selling land to fund their lifestyle. Another's been quite public. The family lost control of the board. The next one, there were too many shareholders. And then spent 20 years arguing about how to cut it up. 15 succession planners, liquidation sale, $3 million in legal accounting fees, and a large reduction in the value of the farm when it was sold at liquidation sale. And the final one, we had succession sorted. Next generation farmer changed his mind, and succession wasn't sorted at all. So the 16 case studies, each of them is described just by one of those little graphs. We also, in the case studies, some really interesting attributes of the continuing and not continuing businesses. Instant leadership versus I'd say patriarchal behaviour. Patriarchal behaviour. I have difficulty with that word. An absolute commitment and determination to achieve the three aims. A belief that the three aims of the big three isn't achievable. A well thought out succession, contrasting with a very poor succession. Progressive farm management, controlling things the way we always did. The customer versus what customer? Use of capital. And before, labour capital. One of case study participants gets really nervous when it's up to 80% equity. Start to get itchy. Go and buy some more money. But the use of capital, using capital to support lifestyle. Go into debt and maintain low equity. Really debt averse and maintaining lazy capital of business. The strategies to woo stakeholders. So in some families, and a real contrast in two of the case studies where one in a large multi-generational family, one lot encouraged the family to go to farms, to stay there, to work in the business, and the other lot said, this is a business, keep out, you're only going to be a nuisance. They deliberately tried to keep the family off farm and disengaged, and that has since been sold. Managing with humility and quietly going about your business versus maintaining your position in the family and society as somebody very important. A determination not to live like peasants. A determination not to look like peasants. Aim goal versus no, and the end game, and really challenging advisors, as one cut in there where somebody says, you know, at this point the advisor said we shouldn't grow the business anymore, and we didn't agree, and he'd been fantastic, but at this stage we'd outgrown him. And the one that I mentioned before, where they actually sacked 7 succession planners and used to threaten them. So they're the contrasting attributes of the continuing and the not continuing businesses.
Right. You can certainly see a bit of a theme emerging there in terms of, I guess, what you're thinking some of the studies might be telling us. Just a reminder to everyone, if you've got questions, to pop those through into your chat box there and send those through to myself, and then we can get those addressed by Mike as we're going through. So I should say too, this is the first of two webinars on this topic, isn't it? So we'll certainly be going through in a bit more detail with some of the learnings from these over the next half hour, and then with the next webinar, which is in a couple of weeks' time. So plenty of opportunities for people to dig into a bit more detail about the project.
Julie, I don't see any more questions on the screen, so
no.
Forge ahead.
Might as well kick on.
Thank you. So, 10 major points that came out of the case studies, out of the 16 case studies. Each studies had between 5 and 10 major lessons. That's a total of about 90 lessons. Combine those lessons into 10 major points. One, and I've mentioned a few times, is start with the end game in mind. The people to ensure that the capital growth is consistent in real terms, a long period, interval of 30 years. And what I mean by that is you take over at 30, hand over at 60, take over at 25, hand over at 55, and people can argue about whether 30 years is a sensible generation interval. We've worked with families who, because of accident or death of the father, were have taken over effectively aged 16. Legally didn't take over, but effectively they'd taken over at the age of 16. And at the other end of the spectrum, a couple who made an appointment to see me about succession planning, and I reckoned I'd have some idea what it was about. He was in his mid-60s, I thought. When he got here, that was confirmed. And the question was how we could get him to hand over from his father, who was 94 or 5 or something. So, generation interval can vary, but I think if we work on 30 years for the purposes of these sums, that's not a bad figure. So, there is a figure of dollars. Number of children, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in the left-hand column. So left-hand column, number of children, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Figure of $1 million. What to do to that figure if the annual inflation is 2.9%, and that we simply want to hand over to the next generation the same start that we had, whatever that start is. Don't want any money for retirement. Assumptions. Have 2 children, that's the second line there. You need to get 6% growth and every year for 30 years. Possible, but you do it by wondering. If you've got 3 children, it goes up to about 7.9. And it's interesting, if you look at that right-hand column, that the capital growth doesn't grow tremendously. You'd think that it would go bigger than from to 9.3 if you've got 5 kids. But in fact, what it just does is to show the power of compound interest. So keep that figure in mind. If you've got 2 children and you want them to have the same start that you had, and it's a 30-year generation interval and 2.9% inflation, you need to get growth of 7% every year for 30 years. And as I said before, that's growth, not profit. If you want $2 million to retire on, that 2 kids, that becomes 8.7% every year. So that says, well, it's difficult to achieve the 3 main aims. All that happens there is that the maths just understands how difficult it is. this major lesson that came out of the case studies is to be in communicating what the end game is. That before, where I talked about when Julie asked me that question, everybody wants to achieve the big three, but it's really important that people are clear about what the end game is. And we'll all have expectations. Those expectations can be managed. We worked on, it's not one of the case studies, but we worked on a plan here not so long ago. There were 10 children in the family, 3 farmers, and rules always were that the farmers would get the farms and the other kids would get what was left over. They were as people were born. If you want to be a farmer, be a farmer. Otherwise, you'll get what's left over. And everybody understood that from an early age. That parents wanted to do. That was accepted in that family. Parents want to try and achieve the 3 main aims. Some want to farm, retire, and spend the proceeds. Some want the father to one child, and again, we mentioned this when Julie asked me before, but some want to stay farm until death, having arranged for the farm to be sold, the proceeds split between the children. People actually talk about whether they'll do their succession plan before they die or after. I think it's very difficult to do it after. To build assets to enable the choices. And if we look at the farm businesses which are continuing in the case studies, they've all done that. They've all built assets to enable choices. It's planning for succession without necessarily having a succession plan. When children are young, they can't be expected to know what they will want to do in life, so the issue is to build the assets to enable choices. Assets can be accumulated to enable to be realised, so the nation farmers can farm and the non-farmers can be paid out. Fourth came through as a major theme from the 20-odd, start early in building human assets. Institution is skilled, knowledgeable and equipped to start to accept management responsibility. Step back and allow room for the next generation to grow. Farmers, like big trees, cast shadows, and sometimes it's very difficult for the next generation to get some sight, to get out of that shadow, and to step out of the shadow. Insurance is agile, proactive, and responsive. Having step back so the exiting generation has no influence or control. And I might, as an aside, Julie, that I know that from personal experience in this business. Used to earn an honest living as a farm manager, and then I started something that's now called Meridian Agriculture. And 5 years ago, I stepped back so we could be professional managers, and we did. And I stepped back to allow them room, and the staff all said, "Oh, we never see Mike. He doesn't ever talk to us anymore." And in fact, myself and one of the other directors stepped back a bit too far. We had to step forward again. We managed to understand what was happening. But you need to step back, but you need to be there if you need it. Next is, as far as the business is concerned, it has to grow to stand still. Declining terms of trade, and even with these great prices we've got at the moment, the terms of trade dictate that in order to stay in the same place, you have to grow. The business has to grow just to stand still. Family skills are utilised in growing the business is the next one. And farm businesses are complex, require high-level skills to balance demands of human, financial and physical capital base. All of those are based on layers of a soil biological system, which overlaid by biological system, which is overlaid by an animal biological system, which is overlaid by seasonal variation and climate shift, which is overlaid by commodity cycles, which is overlaid by the general state of the economy. We would be doing everyone involved a great disservice if we didn't pretend that businesses are complex businesses to manage. That's all very well for me to sit here and say, hey, if you want to achieve the big three, you've really got to make sure you grow that business. I understand that that's much easier to say than it is to do, but it's a necessary part of achieving the big three if that's what you want to do. Now, business may not only be the farm business, it may be off-farm investment. And going back to that sum, ensure that the capital growth is multiplied by the number of children. So, you know, if you double your worth, stay still. If you double your worth in real terms, you're about to stay still. If you've got two children, you only hand on half to each of them. That might be acceptable. That's fine. Nobody's saying you have to do this. Understand what it means if you want to. Two children where the parents want to give the same start as the parents had, $1 million, not farm, assets to try to grow the needs, to grow the assets by 7.9% a year, and I've already talked about that in that other slide. So remember those maths. Remember, if you want $2 million to retire, that was two children, it's 8.7% increase in capital value in your worth, 8.7% increase every year for years. The thing that came out of the was date passengers, and what I mean by that is the underperforming people in family members. And we'll talk this more in the next webinar, Julie, but people make all sorts of allowances for family members, the foibles of family members, because it's a family business. We've said there, don't tolerate passengers. That's what's come out of the companies. I understand the great difficulty that people have where family members are involved, and in the end, people have got to decide, are they going to make the hard business decision, or are they going to allow family values and family considerations to overshadow that business decision? The classic can be that you need somebody else to work on the farm, and you've got a family member who wants to do it, but if you went to the open market, you find somebody that's got a greater skill level. What do you do about that? Well, like most families do. So it's of working through that so you understand what you as a family will do, how you will make those decisions. Don't tolerate passengers as far as land's concerned. We see situations, and in these family businesses, the eight that have really grown, they've usually been reasonably sentimental about that part of the farm which was home, where they grew up, but for the most part, they've been less sentimental about land generally. Got lots of passengers in livestock, and the fact is that a performing animal doesn't a hell of a lot more than a non-performing animal. So if you get that high capital growth, you can't afford passengers in livestock. And passive capital, lazy capital, when equity remains very high for prolonged periods. succession plan. So, as I said before, some families didn't do that until later. They had planned so that they had choices, so that when they went to develop a succession plan, they actually had capital to play with. They had some choices. So that will understand in developing a succession plan, it'll require a team, but between them understand the human, farm management, taxation and legal considerations. And any time a lawyer or an accountant says, yes, I can do this on my own, yep, I'm really worried because I have yet to see a plan that was done by a farm management consultant alone, or a lawyer alone, or an accountant alone, which would end up to scrutiny from the other professions. So people need to have a team, and in fact the successful farm businesses in the studies all have a team approach to succession. Understand that the plan is a process, not an event, and that it will continually evolve over time. We've got a succession plan. Yeah. The old man went to the accountant and they sorted it out and we've got a plan. Well, I doubt that that's going to stand the test of time. Ensure that family members are involved and understand the process, are happy with the professionals who are assisting and have an input. And it's really very important if the family members say, no, I don't want to work with that person. Well, it would be very silly to go ahead because they've got to have faith. Make a decision, no DNA, no say, or the other way about. So that is outlaws included. That's entirely up to the individual. In some of the case studies they were, and others they won't. But generally speaking, the no DNA, no say what seemed to be the most popular of the approaches to that question. Minor case studies. So I mentioned before that we'd done minor case studies. The difficulty about the 16 case studies was that we couldn't analyse them in terms of whether they had whether they were able to carry on a viable farm and get the three main aims or not, because they'd been deliberately chosen. 8 that had and 8 that hadn't. So we did some mini case studies of another 100 businesses we've been involved in a time. And of those, 42% grew to another succession. Failed in 20, in 8%. That is, so that should be at 20% of the 42. So succession failed in 8% of the 100, or 20% of the 42, and that was basically because they had to go too fast and include all family members, and the businesses fell over. The succession failed in that first one. The business failed in that circumstance that I've just described. 25% of the businesses are not continuing; they've been sold. 4% grew to enable succession. Look at that through the satisfied family lens. So to Julie's point before, not everybody wants to get the three main aims. So you could say, I've got a happy family or a satisfied family, I'm going to be happy. So if you look at the 100 through the satisfied family lens, 39% of sample farms were able to achieve a satisfied family after the succession. 56 or 22 of the original were able to achieve a satisfied family and a viable farm and a continuing business. And 33 were able to achieve a satisfied family and sufficient funds for retirement. So, and 28% were able to achieve all three as equal distribution. So 28% from that 100 were able to get all three. 40% grew to enable succession if you look at it through a viable farm lens. So there's happy family lens, viable farm lens. 57% had viable continuing business, so they did well there. Those people, or 39%, had a continuing business and a satisfied family. 500 had a viable continuing farm and sufficient funds for retirement, and 11 were able to achieve the three aims. If you just look at it through viable farm, farm lens, 11 were able to achieve all three aims. And you look at it through the funds for retirement lens, 6 had sufficient funds to retire, 76%. 43%, 33 out of the original 100 had sufficient funds for retirement and satisfied family. You can all read all of those and seeing questions coming up on the screen. So let me summarise, Julie, because I'm just looking at the time. Generally, our history talks about the three main aims: retirement, viable farm, happy family. Family farms try and achieve all three. The vast majority have businesses which are too small. In order to achieve three aims, families must start with the end game in mind. If the whole family is working towards that end game, build capital in plan for succession long before they have a succession plan, so that the business performs well above the average. Work hard, keep at it. Jill, still there, or do you go to sleep?
No, so you said you had some questions coming through directly to you?
Yeah, so I've just and some of those go. So the three. So let me go from the bottom of the questions as I can see. Rob, yes, the questions. Yes, the notes are available. The three aims were or are one's retirement if you want to, although some people don't want to, but so you're not dependent. The older generation is not dependent on the farm. So aim 1, not being on the farm in retirement. Aim 2, viable farm for the child or children who want it, and that might include taking on a fair bit of debt. And 3, that the rest of the family are happy with the result or prepared to wear the result. That's the three aims. Yeah, that's the questions on the screen I think I've dealt with. Yep.
Okay, cool.
So one of the case studies of 8 continuing case studies, all planned for succession, and sometimes a little on, they all developed a succession plan. 8 non-continuing case studies, farms non-continuing, there's only one that had a succession plan, and that's the one where the next generation changed his mind and it all sort of went a bit pear-shaped. It's sort of okay again now, but so that's that question, Julie.
Thanks, Mike.
Sorry, there's another question about when you start the succession planning process, you come in, and my answer to that is, it really, the first thing is to plan to enable succession. So plan to build the business so you've got choices. At the point that you do start to have a succession plan, you can say to the children, well, if you want to be part of the farm, this is the deal, but there are some other alternatives. Start with the kids depends to some extent on their level of interest. So certainly involving the kids in the planning process rather than later been very successful. There's one point I'll make now, Julie, and then I'll shut up, and that is there can be a big difference between starting the plan and enacting the plan. For instance, if we start a plan which involves some handover of assets, there could be some reason to put a hold on the handover of those assets. There's a reason to hurry it too, like loom capital gains tax conditions which might disappear as the business grows. So there are things. Build them so that you've got choices. Succession plan and the succession plan at the appropriate time.
We've just got a question or a request come through from Kirsten wanting to know if you could just pop back to the slide which talks about the three aims of the family farming. So that you did explain that a little bit further before, but we might just pop back there. In the drop-down of the slide numbers, Mike, you should be able to go back to the actual slide that you need.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I'm just we're gonna now. Just
so, Mike,
slide 2 we're looking for. So there we.
Okay.
So the themes of family farming.
Yeah.
And Julie, let me just make these up. You know, these are sort of in the literature as being the three aims of family farming.
Yeah.
But I repeat, it's entirely up to individuals whether they embrace these three aims or not. But they are, again, answer that?
Yeah, fine, thank you. So we just had a question come through, a few people chasing copies of the presentation. So yes, that will be circulated to everyone along with a link to the recording. So you'll have access to all of that information. We've just had a question come through. Obviously, there's some difficulty sometimes with different family members, and you touched on it earlier, Mike, about the value of having outsider coming in who has the trust of the various family members involved. So I don't know if you'd like to add some comments there around, you know, maybe some of the pitfalls to avoid there with that case study where they had so many succession planners come through the process.
Yeah, certainly, Julie. Well, in that case, what happened was there was one of the brothers who wanted to derail the process, and so every time a succession planner got close, he would just throw up a spanner in the works. But generally, and very often it's the old generation who will say, oh, well, so the father will say, well, I'll get my accountant to do it, or I'll get my lawyer to do it. The difficulty with that is if the family, well, firstly, they may not have a lot of respect or regard for that professional, but secondly, it's really important that whoever's helping the family with this is working for the family as a whole, seen to be working for the family as a whole. So if they seem to have a very close, either personal or professional relationship with one family member, it's likely that other family members will get worried about that and think that the family member with whom the professional has the close relationship is going to somehow get some favoured treatment. So to avoid that is to make sure that everybody is comfortable. certainly there are a lot of lawyers who say this is most irregular. I can only take instructions from one person. In this case, they've got to be prepared to be listening to the family and finding a way forward, and not to take sides or instructions from the individual. Now, I should just add there that, I mean, there are lawyers who have made a career out of succession planning and use succession planners, not lawyers. So, certainly people who meet criteria. So just because somebody's a lawyer or an accountant doesn't mean they be precluded. Doesn't mean they're automatically got the skills either.
Just to remind everyone, if you do have any questions for Mike, please send those through into the chat function. Mike, if it's all right with you, while we're just waiting for a few more questions to come through, I might just do a quick plug for the next webinar, if that's okay. So I'll just change it back to make myself the presenter, if that's all right with you.
That's fine.
Thank you very much. Okay, so everyone can see up on their slide at the moment, their screen at the moment, I should say. We've just got a bit of information about what's happening with the next webinar in this series, which again, Mike is presenting and talking through the learnings from his case studies all around the succession planning topics. So there's a few different reasons this webinar that's followed on is basically going to talk through in a bit more detail some of the different steps you can follow if you're sort of looking down the barrel at succession planning and thinking, God, where do I start? So there's plenty of, and some of the hints and tips that we'll be talking about in this webinar, Mike sort of touched on briefly in today's webinar. If you haven't already registered for the next one, it's being held on the 8th of May at 6 p.m. So we thought we'd change the times around a bit just because different webinar times suit different people. So I will send around to all of our attendees the information to register for that next one once I send that info around. I think we might have exhausted the questions from my end. Have you had any more come through directly to you?
There is a question, Julie, about how I just can't get my eye right to it now, but really what sort of percentage of farms have been able to achieve all three of the three aims, and depending on which lens we look through, whether we look through the retirement lens or the viable farm lens, somewhere between 14 and 19% of the 100 mini studies were able to achieve all three. Let me stress that all three, that happy family does not necessarily mean equal distribution, but it means that the individual needs or wants were satisfied. So family expectations were satisfied in between 14 and 19% of the 100. I hope that answers that question.
No, that does. Thank you. So, Mike, there's just another question coming through. So in succession scenarios, are there any common threads or advice regarding balancing expectations of on-farm and off-farm next generation family members? And I suppose Glenn just sent that question through. I guess some of I think the things we've picked up so far in the webinar are that everyone seems to have quite a different approach to that. You know, no DNA, no say. It's just having those clear expectations about what's going on. But Mike, did you add any commentary to that about the balancing of those expectations?
Only, Julie, I mean, in some families, the siblings will think to themselves, there's a pile of money there. divide that by the number of siblings, and that will equal my share. So 100 involved in this business, and there's 4 siblings, so it's going to be $25 each. That's the starting point for some people. That continuum is the starting point that says a sibling has spent a long time working on the farm and there needs to be some reward for that. So the person that's been on the farm will get a greater share than the person who hasn't. What we can do, if people start early enough, is to out some of those difficulties. So, for instance, a sibling works on farm for 15 or 20 years at a reduced rate to the commercial rate, can easily start to clock up the value of the livestock and plant on most farms. So over, say, 15, maybe 20 years, livestock and plant are probably a third of the total farm assets. So there are quite a lot of ways that you can actually start to get some credits, some shares, some ownership for the sibling that's farming. It's on one side, and then on the other side, if you can get that sibling to borrow some money, they might buy the farming siblings early in life, mid-20s or 30s, and at a discount because of net present value, future value calculation. So there's a whole host of recognised accounting management techniques that can be used to even out the distribution, which will enable a farm and a happy family.
Another one of those examples, so that a question comes through asking around, you know, the cost of sending a child to university and giving them, I guess, those skills through a university degree, as opposed to the child who doesn't go to university. Is that perhaps another way of, you know, balancing those kinds of things out? I guess it all comes down to what the understanding was before this all started.
Yes, it does. Look, certainly all of those things are useful. We certainly try and avoid people looking at getting into that into greater detail. But any really, it's a case of the family. So, you know, do you as siblings, or do you as parents, talking to people individually, you know, do you think that somebody's got a better deal than you have? You know, if you do, let's get it on the table and let's deal with it and let's see whether it's real or not. Classic I've had 2 brothers and their lawyer and a financial counsellor and their solicitors in the boardroom of our office, and every now and then one of them explode. These 2 brothers are trying to sort something out, and then one of them yelled out, "What about the cans of Coke? What about the cans of Coke?" It's out at the froth at the mouth. and these 2 brothers are carrying up, I don't know, $6 million worth of assets, and they keep petrol on the farm. And one of them, every time he filled the unit up with petrol, put a can of Coke on the account, and the other one didn't. Those cans of Coke became a major issue. You know, with $12 million being cut up, and 3 brothers and two 6x4 trailers, and 2 of them wanted the good blue one. I nearly pulled the $600 out of my wallet. You know, I mean, it was just.
So there's a lot of examples here of how long-term bugbears can rise to the surface when you're frustrated.
That's right.
Okay, well, look, we might wrap it up there. We haven't had any further questions come through. Thanks so much, Mike, for your time in preparing this and going through those case studies to pull them apart and present these learnings to everyone. And thank you to all of our attendees who've dialed in today. I really appreciate the interest you've shown in the topic here in the webinar. And just a quick reminder, look, please do join us for the next one in a few weeks on the 8th of May. We really appreciate the interest you've shown and all the questions you've been sending through. It certainly helps us. So without further ado, we might wrap the webinar up there. Thanks again, everyone, and I hope you have a fantastic rest of the day. Thank you.
And Julie, just for those people who joined late, thank you again to MLA, and thank you particularly to the participants who were part of the case studies, because without their cooperation, we wouldn't have been able to do any of this.
Good point. Thanks very much, Mike. Everyone, have a good day. We'll talk to you at the next webinar. Thank you.
Thanks all.